Hello hens, how are you all diddly doing? Thank you so much for your beautiful response on the Tudor build. This week we are doing the Victorian era, and I think I'm going to do these like once every 2 weeks, which gives me enough time to actually research it and everything. But without further ado, let's jump on in because the Victorians are my favourite era of all time. Before we get into the video, just to let you know, the autumn collection is available on Unreal. It's the first release in a long time since I've moved house. It is available on there, worldwide shipping. Use code first order to get 20% off your first order. And also, I'm back streaming on Twitch again. So if you would like to go follow me on there, it's twitch.tv/Plumbella. I play The Sims, but I also play variety games, and I want to do a dark playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3. So now let's jump on into the Victorian times, my darlings. So for the outside, when I think of Victorian houses, I tend to think of, honestly, quite like The Sims. These Queen Anne Victorian houses that are really colourful, San Francisco type vibes, but I don't really see that in my day-to-day life when I see Victorian houses in the UK. And because I'm focusing this kind of on the UK style of things, I did focus on a UK style Victorian houses. I'm just absolutely obsessed with the Victorian era in the UK. I just think it's absolutely fascinating. I think it's absolutely awful, but I think it's fascinating nonetheless. I read a statistic that the majority of houses in the UK were built during the Victorian time, which I just think is so interesting. Say what you want about the Victorians, they were definitely influential. But the amount of houses being built during this time was because this time was a huge time for societal change, which, yes, will I be saying this about every single time period in history? Yes, but God help me, it is true, darling. And the Victorians, for me, like, yeah, the medicine was just pure vibes, to be honest, and Queen Vicky was a little bit raunchy, and you know what I mean? The most defining thing about this period for me is 100% the Industrial Revolution. Like, it just completely changed the way how society operates, and even the world. Middlesbrough, for example, which is where I live Middlesbrough, that was a very small town. It had places, and it is very old, but it was very small. And then industrialization happened. We had mines, steelworks, brick industries. All of that was founded at this time, and Middlesbrough went from a really small town to being referred to as Ironopolis because of how much it exported things. It was pivotal in the Industrial Revolution. Even Sydney Harbour Bridge was built by a Middlesbrough company. I feel very strongly about Middlesbrough. I love Middlesbrough. As industries kept on booming and booming and booming, so did the need for housing. And I really wanted to focus on working class builds during this because that's where I'm most acquainted with Victorian life. And I, again, wanted to focus on a working class Victorian build for this one. But I didn't think it would translate that well in The Sims because a lot of Victorian houses during this time were 2 up, 2 down. If they weren't terraced, they were back-to-back houses, which means that the windows were only in the front and they were terraced on the sides and on the back. And I didn't think this would translate that well in The Sims 4 because British houses are really close together and houses in The Sims 4 are not. Like, it would look very odd. But let it be known that I know a lot about working class households during this period and I'm still going to talk about them. And these houses, specifically the working class houses, were purpose built for the workers. So if you worked at the local mine, you would get put up in this house, and they were very, very close together. They weren't very big. A lot of them are referred to as cesspits in some places. They were not good, and obviously disease spread rampantly throughout this because close, confined places with lots of smog and not that much clear air. Disease, cholera, dead. Although cholera comes from the Waddale. But for the house that I built in this one, the type of man that owns this house, a detached house babe, he probably owns a local factory too. Whereas the workers' houses were generally closer to town, closer to the work, middle class tended to be further away from the town, which was where the more affluent areas were. And probably detached rather than terraced too. Probably some were semi-detached, which is where there's just one on the other side of you. But this one in particular is detached because it would look better in The Sims. And then in terms of the actual colours, like I said, the outside of Victorian houses, when I just think of a Victorian house straight off the bat, pink and red and green, literally, like I said, just that San Francisco version of the house. But in the UK, it wasn't typically like this. Like, I'm sure you have some really extravagant Victorian houses during this time because the Victorians were exceptionally extravagant. To build houses, they actually utilised what the local industry was and what the local stone was. The majority of houses in Middlesbrough are brick because we made bricks. And that's why red brick is often associated with so much with Britain. Whereas, like my brother who lives in Ireland, red brick houses are not as common over there and are a sign of wealth. Extremely common here because we have an abundance of it. But it's not all red brick either, because if you go to different towns in England, based on what their local stone is, that's usually what the local houses will be made of too. So you could have a light stone house, for example. Middlesbrough is very red. But in terms of building this, it was a real trust the process moment. There was multiple times building this. I was like, do you know what? I'm just gonna delete it all. But I didn't. I stuck with it because I read that Victorians like to use colour, not so much on the bricks and everything, but more so on the eaves. And in some places they had a mock Tudor style. And I was like, trying to put it together and I was like, this red is just exceptionally jarring. And it did not look good. I also did not find appropriate windows because of advancements in the industry at this time. Georgian windows tended to be 6-panelled windows or whatever, and they were separated by small pieces of glass. Whereas the Victorian times, during this period, the advancements meant that they could just have one big panel of glass. The windows reflected that as well, but I couldn't really find anything like that, so I just went for these strange evil windows because I thought, you know what, it kind of does the job. And it also has cast iron on it, which was another advancement during this time. I would say cast iron for me is one of the things that is, I look at it and I'm like, that's a Victorian. Because British houses are so close together, it was difficult to not make this look bare. And especially for the garden. I'm still not happy with the garden in the end of it. I'll put a washing line and stuff in there, but this family doesn't strike me as the type of family to actually do the washing. This family strikes me as the type of family to hire a working class mother to do the washing and pay the mother to do that. And honestly, that is grueling work. Like, there's many jobs I would not like to have, and one of those is washing clothes in the Victorian times. Absolute full day affair. But apart from that, I was like, what am I going to put in this garden? The middle class during this time had bigger gardens, but working class gardens at this time, if they even had any, were tiny and they had absolutely no green. There was no plants to be seen. It was a very grey time, especially because of all the smog. You would have to clean the outside of your windows daily just to get rid of the smog because it was the Industrial Revolution. And if you go into these old towns like Leeds specifically, for example, and you look at churches, you can see on the brickwork that it's still black from the Industrial Revolution. So imagine that every single day and having to keep on top of that. So this entire thing all came together, and there was a thing at the time called nature isolationism, where people were isolated from nature. So the upper class during this time, philanthropists, if you will, donated parks to this cause so that the working class could experience greenery. And so they had somewhere to go. A lot of these still stand. I don't know how it is in other places, but in Middlesbrough, we have Albert Park, we have Stuart's Park. So, like, you can still see the influence of them today. But at the time, it was also a way to combat, honestly, mass drinking and sin. Because if you're working absolutely grueling hours and just to avoid the workhouse, no rights or anything, and if you even get injured at work, then you're fucked and have to go to the workhouse. Honestly, I'd drink too, babe. I'd drink too. And drinking was very prevalent during this time. I mean, as it always is in Britain, but Middlesbrough in particular was known as the capital of sin. Life is nasty, brutish, and short, guys. But yeah, the parks were a way to combat this because Victorian ideals at the time, it was very Christian. It wasn't very nice, but it like the Christian morals, the Victorian morals of this time. And then the working class and how they operated in their lives was a huge juxtaposition to that because, I mean, the two, it's like, did not operate. They would try and get the working class to get the Sunday best on, go out to these parks as well. And in these parks, they also had statues of important figureheads in society. Like Queen Vicky may even be present, do you know what I mean? It wasn't just for people to look at and be like, yeah, that's whoever made that. Tell you what, good sculptor. It was also a way of making sure that people felt like they would be on what kind of hold you accountable. So this was a way to combat that. So it was like, the Queen is watching, you better behave. And that's not really relevant to the plot, but I think that's one of the most interesting things about this time and like the morals of the time, and just it's just a full era of extremes. Like, as much as you had the Victorian morals of the time horrifically strict, you also had the complete opposite of that, where Middlesbrough is known as the capital of sin. Then in terms of the actual structure for the build, I'm kind of acquainted with British floor plans. I don't think this one's 100% accurate, to be fair, because I'm more acquainted with the semi-detached floor plan. But I just kind of went with it. I know that during this time they had a scullery. I could imagine the workers of the house using the scullery, not really used by the main family in a separate dining room. But it's connected to the kitchen, and then it's also connected to the servants' quarters downstairs. Upstairs was a lot more basic, so I just kind of went with my gut, but I don't think it's 100% accurate. And I also controversially added a bathroom. I'm not sure that this type of family would have had a bathroom, but some rich families did have a bathroom at this time. But I also needed something to go in that room. And I was like, you know what? They might have saved and splashed on a bathroom with running water. And then in terms of decorating the house, I love how Victorians decorate their houses. I don't like the Victorian aesthetic in terms of clothing. I do like it on men. I don't like Victorian women's clothing. I don't like anything of a high neck and like the really big bustle at the back. That's not a bit of me, babe. But in terms of house style, oh my God, they were the original maximalists. I'm just obsessed with it. Everything was showy. During this time, there would be so many rugs on the floor and like trinkets. Rich people during this time were weird as well. There's this thing of Victorians used to eat mummies. No, they didn't really. Like, the average Victorian wasn't eating a mummy. It was the really rich Victorians that got so rich during this time that they didn't have anything better to do. So they're like, yeah, you know what? Might as well eat a fucking mummy. And then also the really rich had basically their own museum in their estates as well. So they would buy things, colonialism. And when I say buy things, I mean that they would steal things from other countries and display it and have people come round to see. And but also, like people like to do, people like to die in history. And there was a lot of deadly things during this time. Obviously the medicine, but also in the house. There was a lot of killers in the house. Lead and arsenic. So for me, some of the main contenders. Lead in the paint, arsenic in the wallpapers. There was actually a child died from arsenic poisoning, and it's because a bit of wallpaper came off and there was sucking on the wallpaper and it was arsenic. And also in terms of medicine, like when I say it's vibes, it is literally just vibes, because apothecaries, or is that what they were called at that time, would have these big portions out the front to make it look like they really knew what they were doing, but it was just like random concoctions that just look good. It like pure just vibes. It's like you got a toothache, a cut. And but yeah, I'm not killing my Sims, so I found it safe to use wallpaper, you know. Like I said, the downstairs was what was used to show off to guests. Like they might have had how I have on my walls, paneling to show wealth, etc., and then have picture frames hanging on the walls with the big metal. Ugh, guys, you know what I'm talking about sometimes, but why say many word when few word do trick, you know? But then the upstairs was kind of in comparison to that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it still wasn't plain. I don't think anything Victorians do are plain. I don't think they do anything half-assed even. Wallpaper in the upstairs bedrooms tended to be a floor to ceiling. It didn't tend to be as showy. But I don't think I built this house big enough though, because anyone who lives in this type of house, who has enough money for this type of house, is obviously upper middle class. And if they had kids, this era was big on like their kids should be seen and not heard. So if you were a woman and you had kids in this house, I'm using traditional gender terms for that just because that's how it was at the time. But one thing that I love is historical fiction, but rewritten through a queer lens. So if anybody has recommendations for that, please do let me know. I know that there is A Marvelous Light. I've read that one. But yeah, please let me know any, because that's one of my favorite things. That's why I love fan fiction so much, because it takes a type of story and then puts it through generally a queer lens. It's beautiful. Amazing, which is not relevant to the plot, and I can't remember how we got on that topic. Oh yeah, if women had kids during this time, baby, you would not be seeing your kids. They would be away with the governess and you would be alone. It's quite a lonely time, to be fair. A documentary I watched showcased the lives of women in the different classes during this time, and honestly, all of them were really not good. The working class ones obviously just worked to the bone. The upper class ones, she was really sad because they didn't really see the kids and they didn't have much of a purpose, and obviously they're not a person in their own right during this time. Yeah. I also included basement in this build as well, which is fun. These were common in Victorian homes, but to save money a lot of times they were just half basements, so they didn't cover the full area of the house. But I also put the servants' rooms in the basement as well, which I don't actually think is that factually accurate. I can see the servants' rooms being in the attic more likely, but it just worked well to put them here because the scullery was connected to the stairs down to the basement, which was also connected to the dining room. Like in terms of travel, it just made sense. So I put it down there. And I did not put handrails on because, girl, fuck them servants and fuck you too. Because servant stairs during this time were absolutely deadly. Like, do you think you've got a good job working at an upper middle class home? No, darling. Like the health and the safety does not exist. There is nothing of the sort. And then in the basement as well, I did include a coal store here, which honestly in The Sims, it's kind of vibey. Like, oh, this little secret room. In real life, my first uni house had a coal store in the basement. And the basement was half renovated, like it was mainly renovated apart from this coal store. And that's also where my bedroom was. And honestly, it was the dampest, smelliest thing ever. And I used to have to go through the coal store to put the heating on. And it just, when it rains outside, it smells like that house. And the walls were so damp that if you push them, they literally crumbled in between your hands. So I do not recommend coal stores. But I mean, they worked at the time. Do you know what I mean? They worked at the time. But yeah, I think that's everything that I've got for this build today. I feel like I've just rambled at you for however long this video is. But it's because you just don't understand how much I'm obsessed with the Victorians. I could hear about the Victorians all day, every day. And no amount of information is ever going to be enough. I haven't even mentioned like Jack the Ripper. I haven't really delved into cholera. There's so many things that I haven't delved into. Queen Victoria was absolutely like, she was a little bit delulu in the head, and the way she treated children and everything was just up. Like, there's so much about the Victorian period. I just can't fit it all into this type of video. Guys, I want to become a historian. I might go back to uni, get a master's in history. I just love, but I want to focus solely on Victorian history, and I don't think that that's available. But yeah, thank you for letting me talk at you for however long. I love you all so much. I'm not sure what the next era will be, but we'll find out when I upload. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, bitch.